Okay, looks like we're live. I'd like to call the Economic Development Committee to order. I'll call the roll. Chairman Ward is here. Deputy Chair Cleary. Mr. Cleary, I see him. He's here. Mr. Bruschi. I don't see Mr. Bruschi. Is he on? No. Mr. Drake. Mr. Efficoro. I see him.
Yeah.
Mr. Langdon.
Here.
Mr. Reedy.
Here.
Mr. Ricard.
Present, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Here, go back. Mr. Bruschi, are you on? Okay, we have a quorum though. So we'll move on. The first item is the approval of the previous meeting minutes. They've all been sent out. Hopefully everybody had a chance to read them. Is there any corrections or questions on the minutes? If not, we'll entertain a motion to accept.
Make a motion.
Mr. Langdon, second. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor? Those opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Item number 2 is local law A for 2021, a local law related to the procedures for the establishment, operation, modification, and disestablishment of tourism improvement districts in Albany County. I see the sponsor, Mr. Efficoro, is on. Mr. Efficoro, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is enabling. This is an enabling legislation that would allow Discover Albany to put together a plan to establish the tourism improvement district in the county of Albany. Now, this legislation itself does not establish the tourism improvement district. It just allows Discover Albany to put together a plan which has to come back to the legislature for a vote in order for the tourism improvement district to be established. So, and I believe this is something that is going to bring economic development to Albany and help our hotel industry recover from the pandemic that we currently face and the economic downturn that we are currently in. So this is not only going to affect also the hotel industry, it is also going to trickle down in benefits to our malls, our grocery stores, and other businesses around, restaurants and stuff, because people will come to Albany and eat and go for shopping and use our transportation and everything else, cabs and everything else. So I'm urging everyone to support this, and it has just been recommended favorably from the law committee, and I'm hoping we can do the same in this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not sure if Jill is here from Discover Albany. Yes, if you would allow, I would like to yield some of my time to Jill from Discover Albany.
Well, I would normally we only allow members to speak on legislation, Mr. Efficoro. If the committee decided otherwise, I would certainly entertain that. But I know that we did have a presentation, a lengthy presentation last week, and we did have a public hearing where there was a lot of great discussion last night. So I will entertain that if the committee wishes to do that. However, if not, I'd like to move on and ask the committee members if they have a question. And I see Mr. Langdon has his hand up.
Is it okay to proceed with the question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Langdon.
All right. Yeah, I was actually pretty intrigued by this. I was kind of curious, one, how do you expand hotel activities in a pandemic when we're not seeing, a full release? We're some of our biggest challenges in competition, in my opinion, is the restrictions that we may have in New York versus what other states are under right now. But actually, I really felt that Ms. Delaney and her team did a pretty good job explaining what they do and why. And as somebody who has a daughter in event industry in Manhattan, I can validate that those processes and negotiations are real. So I'm aware of that kind of scenario. I guess my biggest concern with this isn't what they want to do, it's how they want to pay for it. In listening to a lot of the public comments last night, the organization has been praised regardless of what name they're under. It's that team that I, sounds like has an enormous amount of support, and they're very successful with what they have to work with. But I just don't think that adding 2% tax, and in the last discussion I listened and it was talked about, but I did look it up in Webster's, and an assessment is a tax according to Webster. But anyway, it is a tax, or it's going to be tacked on to the hotel rates. And right now we are the highest in the area, in the region. The idea of adding 2% more just doesn't make economic sense to me. What I do think needs to happen is we're already charging 6%. And I do think that, when I listened to, I believe it was Mr. Ken Raymond last night, who owns Prime Properties, and he was actually part of the development and the creation of this capital center that's getting 3% of that 6%. And he was not in favor of this. He said that he was told when he set up the original bed tax that it wasn't a good idea. They did it, and it's not being allocated the way it should be. Personally, I think sounds like we should be going to the Capital Center. They're getting 3% because of financing that they did not use. They didn't build the $400 million facility. So if they're getting 3%, I think they ought to be passing some of their resources on to this Ms. Delaney's group. And that's the way, in my opinion, that we should really be funding this. I was a little put out, to be honest, when I was originally told that there was 100% support from the hotel industry on this. And by their own letter that came out, a little flyer that came out here in the last day or two about support, down at the bottom, it talks about 4,311 of the beds are in favor of this. But when you look at that, you got against, and you also have no vote. So there's 2,400 roughly that are not supporting this. And I would tend to think that a lot of these no votes are because there may be some of those people that are a little afraid to speak up against this, since the district would probably have a lot to do with who's going to be recommended for a particular event. And
Right.
I think those hotels do not want to be taken out the list of potential beds that people could utilize in a major event like that. So consequently, I'm open to discussing this concept, but I am not okay with the way they'd like to finance it at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else on the committee that has a question or comment at this point? I have Ms. Cunningham waiting in the wings here, waiting for her turn. If there's nobody from the committee, Mr. Cleary?
So this would make it so that we can create the district. Is that when we discuss how much the percentage would be? It did seem to me that when they showed the slides, if we did what they said, I thought it said like 3.7 million, which would even be bigger than any other of the cities in upstate New York. Is that something that would be discussed later on? What the percentage would be, the 2%?
Yeah, my understanding, Mr. Cleary, is that we are now voting on enabling legislation that would allow the formation of this tourism improvement district, and that the final product, including percentage and territory, would come back to us for a vote again. So, Mr. Rogers, would you like to clarify that?
Yeah, essentially that's correct. I think, Mr. Ward, thank you. I want to be in full disclosure. I think the group of hotels and the that have been pushing this, and it is a large group of hotels. There are certainly, as indicated last night and by the list that were sent around in an effort to be transparent, we are not by any means claiming it is unanimous support, but it is a significant margin of support and majority. They are pushing 2%, but that is not written into this legislation, this enabling legislation. So that's not something that's being voted on tonight. But, you know, full disclosure, that is the number being discussed. However, it could be, you know, up for further discussion.
Thank you. Are any other committee members? If not, Ms. Cunningham, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. I appreciate it. I'm a visitor to this committee, so I know that I get some airtime, and I appreciate that very much. I decided to hop onto this Zoom because we had a very lively discussion in the law committee with a lot of good support, a lot of kind of, I guess, you know, discussion about overall taxes, which I think there's always an appropriate time and place for that. But I just want to reiterate, because I do feel really strongly about this, and I commend Mr. Epicora for the introduction of this. This is an investment in our economic development as a community. And I used to do quite a bit of meeting planning in several of my older positions. And the way this would work is give Albany County, through, you know, Jill's organization, the tools to be able to go after interesting opportunities and venues that are always presenting themselves. So, you know, a music festival is looking for a venue to bring its whole, you know, weekend long kind of presentation, and they're looking at, you know, Burlington, Vermont, and Albany, New York, and others. And this would allow Albany to put together and be competitive, a package that would then benefit tremendously our community, and perhaps prompt a ripple effect of other organizations looking for new venues to then consider Albany. So it really has, I've seen in the meeting planning venue, you know, a buzz can be created, and all of a sudden Albany is looked at as a really attractive venue, which we should be. We have so much to offer. We have a lot of hotels. We have a lovely city. We have great restaurants. We're a gateway to the Adirondacks. We have so much to offer. So I commend the sponsor of this. I commend the thinking behind this. It's visionary. It's honestly a no-brainer and where we want to be as Albany County. If we do this, we will look back in 10 years and say, thank God we did this, because it brought some really interesting stuff to Albany County, and the economic impact will be demonstrated by then. So again, thank you for giving me some airtime, Sean. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you. Any other, Mr. Reedy?
Just want to get some clarification. You know, looking at the update and the letter that was sent out today, you know, let's say, you know, when hotels do vote on the TID, that there was 59% support. To the hotels that do, you know, would not end up supporting this, are they like automatically brought into the TID when this vote happens? And
Yes.
how do you enforce compliance for, you know, the hotels that do not want to be part of the TID and don't support it?
Mr. Ward, if you're open to allowing Jill Delaney and consultant Tiffany Gallagher to respond to those questions, you'll get a better answer.
Mr. Rogers, I would only do that for you and Mr. Epicora, because we are starting to get pointed. But however, I do want to remind the committee members and all others that we do have a guest speaker waiting that has another very important message. I don't want to downplay the importance of this legislation, but there has been a lot of opportunity for discussion on this. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have all the questions answered myself. And, you know, I still have a lot of questions, and I have concerns, especially when last night, and I really haven't had an opportunity to follow up on this, but you know, last night we heard from 3 of the people who I think are the pioneers of Albany County hotels come out not in favor of this. When you're talking about the Desmond, the Century House, and Ken Raymond himself, those are three people that have been in the hotel business before we were born, probably. And that concerns me that they're all against it. And, I'd like to find out the real reason for that and, whether or not it's something that maybe we've overlooked. And there's also some questions, some legal questions that I know I've heard conflicting reports from some of our attorneys as to whether or not this enabling legislation is, what this would do at the state level, and whether or not, and why hasn't the state taken this on if it's been on their desk? So those things kind of they set up red flags for me. And yes, the money that's collected here is not going to come out of the pockets of our taxpayers. It's going to come out of the pockets of visitors. However, the businesses are what I'm concerned about, and the fact that if a business is in the district, they wouldn't have a voice. If this gets voted in, they wouldn't have a voice of whether or not they can opt in or out of this. They would have to be in. So there is a lot of things to talk about here. But at this, I was ready. I was ready to voice my opinion on this tonight. And then after last night's public hearing, I have some doubt now. And I still think there's some question. It doesn't mean I'm against it. I have like Mr. Langdon, I have family members that are in event planning, and I very much know the importance of a funding source. And I've also been involved with, both the men's and the women's NCAA tournaments here on the local organizing committee, and I've been involved with the public high school state championships for years. So I understand funding source is important, and we need an edge against our competitors. However, we only get one shot to create this legislation, and I want to make sure we're doing the right thing. If we rush into it, maybe we're missing something here. Maybe there's another opportunity. Mr. Langdon brought up the Capitol Center. I don't think there's anybody in county government I've heard from that's happy that the Cap Center is getting 3% of our hot tax. But it is what it is right now. Is there an opportunity for us to capture some of that to help with events? I don't know. But this is a tax. It's going to be imposed on somebody. It might not be Albany County residents per se, but these businesses are residents and are taxpayers. So we got to make sure we're doing the right thing here. But Mr. Roger, I got off on a tangent. I will let Ms. Delaney answer that. Yes.
Thank you. I'm not sure now what question I'm answering.
I forgot it myself. It was Mr. Reedy's question. Please rephrase.
The chair may have answered my question. I was seeking clarification that if the TID vote was in favor, the hotels that didn't support it, they do end up being brought into it. Yes. So I guess just a follow up on that, just for clarification, as part of what we would be voting on, in a sense, are we sort of voting in allowing a TID vote to happen and the possibility of it? We're voting on like making the county kind of the enforcement mechanism of it. Is that part of what our vote would do?
Correct. Yeah. So it would follow that same collection mechanism that's already in place for occupancy tax, for example. And there were several other questions and comments that I'm happy to address that if the time allows.
That's all
we do have to be. We'll just take them as they come. Mr. Efficoral?
Yes. I actually forgot what I wanted to say. That took too long. And this is not a one-shot thing because this is an enabling legislation. Basically, the Discover Albany will still have to go ahead to put a plan together, and it has to come for a vote. And when that passes, that is when the TID can then be established. So this legislation does not establish the tourism improvement district. This just allows them to go ahead to formulate a plan for the tourism improvement district.
Thank you. Is there any other committee members that would like to speak? If not, I have Mr. Grimm. You were a former committee member, so I'll give you the floor over Mr. Bergdorf.
Okay. I'm a lot smarter than him, Sean, so that's good.
Oh, you can deal with that in your own caucus.
Thank
I'm not touching it.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I think the public hearing last night, there were only 3 hotelers who spoke in favor of this, and 2 of them are on the board of Discover Albany.
Yeah.
And the 3 that spoke against it, as you point out, are very prominent hotelers, including Ken Raymond, who founded the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And he said, okay, we'll go along with the hotel tax if it gets sent into tourism and Convention and Tourism Bureau. It was 3 cents, then it was 4 cents, then it was 6 cents. Now it's 8 cents. So this is a $3 million tax. Let's be clear about this. We've had this nonsense about it's an assessment. This is a $3 million tax we're going to impose. Shift wealth from the hands of people into the hands of government. And the question is not whether tourism investment is a smart idea. It is. If you spend the dollars wisely, you can really get a return on tourism investment. The question is who pays? Now the county, first of all, the deal with the state is terrible. And we should be channeling our efforts to change a contract that was based on a $375 million capital center with a bunch of debt. But now it's a $78 million capital center with no debt. So the circumstances have changed dramatically, but the formula hasn't. They get 3 cents when they shouldn't be. So our state legislators, we should be lobbying them to change that formula to free up some money for tourism. Secondly, there's a lot of money in the county, but listen, when we wanted to give Advanced Albany $500,000 in startup cost, we found the money. When we wanted $500,000 for COVID relief, we found the money. Now there's a good causes, but the money is available in the budget. We have vacant lines all over the place. We have contingency accounts all over the place. There's no reason why we can find some money in the budget to fund tourism to the extent that tourism is going to return the value of our dollars. And so there's also the fact that we're sitting on a fund balance of over $50 million. Even with COVID, we have a substantial fund balance that's just sitting there. That's taxpayer money. And we're also being handed $60 million by the feds with the stimulus. So there's money out there that could be steered into tourism without raising taxes, because this is a strategy that says, yes, we all want more people to come to Albany and spend money here. But if you come to Albany, we're going to charge you more for your hotel room. So that is a strategy that doesn't make sense. It's not economic development. It's not tourism. It's an attempt to shift wealth from the hands of people to the hands of government. So I think there's no reason why we should pass it, and I hope we vote no tonight. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Bergdorf.
I will try to be much quicker than I was in the law committee. And I'm sure everyone will be very grateful. First of all, it passed out of the law committee 5-4. And it was a spirited debate. I was originally told both by Barrero and the county executive's office that the industry was unanimously behind this. First 4 people that I called were people in the Latham, Cohoes area in Loudonville, and they were absolutely opposed. I then reached out to some smaller hotels on Wolf Road, and they told me they had always been against the bed tax, but they had some very convincing visits from Ms. Delaney and Mike Hoffman, and they had changed their position. But that was last June, and they didn't think the time was appropriate now to put a new 10% on or 2% on an industry that is striving to survive. I had also been told that the Albany Hilton had concerns. So today I spoke with the manager of the Albany Hilton, and he told me that he had had discussions with his ownership team, and
they support the concept. They support not capitalize Albany, discover Albany. But the timing is terrible, given their state of occupancy and adding a potential tax. The list that went out tonight from the chairman's office shows only 4 people in opposition. That actually should be 6 or 7 people. And I think someone who said it before said there are a lot of people who didn't give an answer because they're concerned that people don't want to hear their answer. But the biggest thing, and I'll make this my last point, is while Ms. Delaney is, and first of all, everybody had phenomenal things to say about Discover Albany and working with Discover Albany. Everybody would like to see that 6% recarved up and a bigger piece to go to Discover Albany. But they're very, very hesitant about a tax. And that's for local competition reasons. Okay, right now we're at 14%, 8% sales tax plus 6. And if we added 2 more, we'd be at 16. Believe it or not, Clifton Park is at a total of 8%, 7% sales tax and 1% bed tax. Now, if you go up to Saratoga Springs, they add an extra 5% to the bed tax and you get 13%. So it's 7 and 6, but they're still below where we are today. Schenectady is 13% and Rensselaer County is 11%. One of the hoteliers told me that if he has to compete with a hotel in southern Saratoga County, there is right now, the difference between 14 and 8, there is a 6% spread, and a meeting will say to him, well, the first thing you have to do is drop your room rate by 6% in order for me to compare apples to oranges. So they're very concerned that 6% becomes 8% and they lose out in the local competition. I think we need to find a way through other revenue sources, whether it's the IDA, the LDC, the City of Albany, who has gotten a tremendous amount of funding, much more than the county, if you will, in this latest COVID relief bill. We've got to find a way to get Ms. Delaney more money. But now, for the people that I have talked to, who are not on the board of Discover Albany, but they're actually independent hoteliers, many of whom have been on that board, they don't believe now is the right time to do it. So those were my reservations in the law committee, and I'll stop and leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Bergdorf. Mr. Reedy.
Thanks, Chairman. I have a follow-up question, which maybe Jill or maybe Ms. Gallagher could help on.
Well, I'd really like to keep it to one. We're in a committee meeting here, so we've allowed Ms. Delaney to be the spokesperson.
Sure. Well, I'll make a comment / question. I'd be curious to see if other TID legislation has been passed that's had a higher threshold than just 51% of hotels needed to opt in for the TID creation. I do have a little bit of concern on sort of just like the 50 plus 50% plus 1, leading to that. So don't have to answer that now. I'll follow up, but I'm very curious to see if this has always been the threshold on that. So I think that's just one thing that's kind of piqued my interest in our ongoing discussion on this.
It's actually a very good question.
Happy to answer that if you allow, Mr. Ward.
If you have an answer, yes.
Yeah,
please.
certainly. Massachusetts passed with 62% threshold recently, the whole state. Baltimore is 54%. So there is some variance in there. We're currently at 59%. And the only hotels that have come out against it are the hotels that Mr. Bergdorf referenced. One of the speakers last night seemed to be misconstrued as against it when he just said he would rather it came from the occupancy tax, but he supports us getting the funds.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
you are correct on that. Mr. Efficoral?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add that there is no better time to do this than now, because our hotel industry is struggling and they need these conventions, they need these activities, and we all need it. Our economy is going to suffer. We all know it. It's coming, it's impending, and we need this right now to drive more people to Albany to fill our hotel rooms. And also, I just want to add that the list that we send gives a whole long list of people hotels that are in support of this. And even though most of them, a lot of them didn't come out to speak last night, I already sent out letters of support and basically to everyone, and every member has it. And that is why they were not there to speak last night, because I already delivered their letters of support. We have only 4 hotels that are against, which some people probably went to convince to go against. I don't know, I can't say. But I wouldn't also say that the people that are no votes are against, because you couldn't go to convince them to be against or be in favor. That is why you just couldn't get a hold of anyone to make that decision for those hotels that are no votes. It doesn't mean they are against. It's just they are absentees, if you would say that. But we have a long list of hotels that are in support of this, and there is no better time to do this than now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I do want to add a comment, though. One comment that was brought up here was the competition with other counties. And it isn't, I noticed right away that probably the 3 hotels that have concerns about this are probably the closest big hotels to Saratoga County. So that may be a concern of ours.
Mr. Chairman, the hotels in Saratoga also charge more money for their rooms than Albany County.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Hotels in Saratoga also generally charge more money for rooms per night than Albany County.
You're correct on that. For the most part, I would assume that's correct. So I did have someone just chat question. Do the percentage of hoteliers who need to approve it, is it 51% of rooms or 51% of hotels with 25 or more rooms? That's for Ms. Delaney.
So it's 51% of rooms, but all of those are 25 or more rooms. So it's based on the occupancy tax law, which is hotels of 25 rooms or more.
Correct. So one hotel with a lot of rooms will have more weight than somebody with less rooms.
Well, and it's also based on number of hotels. So we put both in there. It's number of hotels in favor and number of rooms in favor.
Oh, okay. But it's 51% of that formula.
Yes.
Not the number of hotels. Okay. Thank you.
Both votes. Yeah, in both votes. Yeah.
Both.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Ricard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to take everybody else's time because I asked substantial questions in the last meeting, and I appreciate Ms. Gallagher and Ms. Delaney answering those questions. It's very appreciated. And like Mr. Bergdorf said, it was a spirited debate. I think that's a good thing in a constitutional republic that everybody has the opportunity to speak. That means we're doing our job. Everybody's doing their job, so that's a good thing. With that said, I think Mr. Ward, the chairman, alluded to it at the beginning. I still have several unanswered questions that need to be resolved. It's not an indictment against anybody. Jill does a great job with Discover Albany. From everybody I spoke to, tangentially, great job. So I appreciate that. But I just need some additional questions to be answered. I firmly believe that there has to be ways in which we can come up with additional revenue streams to fund Discover Albany? Because obviously it sounds to me like they need some additional funding. How we do that, I'm not really sure, but to just rush this through, I like those questions answered. So that's about all I have to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ricard, and I echo your thoughts. If there's no other questions, I'd like to,
Mr. Ward?
many different scenarios that we can consider here, and I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how I'm going to vote for this on the floor. I definitely, I've always been a proponent of Discover Albany, or the former Convention and Visitors Bureau. I think they do a great job. I understand the need for a funding source because I've been involved in these processes before. However, I definitely have some questions about this particular legislation, and I'm not sure I'm prepared to vote one way or another tonight. But one thing that we've done in the past is to get it to the floor, because I don't want to hold this up either. Just to get it to the floor, and maybe I can get my questions answered before the vote. We could put this out without a recommendation to go to the floor if anybody was in favor of that, or if the majority of you were in favor of that.
I can make a recommendation with no vote.
Okay, that's a motion. We have a second. Mr. Collins, you can't vote though.
I'm sorry.
I'll second it.
On Zoom. I just want to note, I believe Mr. Smith joined us and Mr. Drake definitely joined us. Chris, is that you?
It's me. I was. Yep.
Okay. That's it, Mr. Ward. I just wanted to make sure you have full capacity.
Okay, so Mr. Smith, were you the second?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on that, or?
I'm sorry, what was the recommendation, Chair?
What the proposal, what the motion was from Mr. Ricard and seconded by Mr. Smith was to vote it out without any recommendation at all, just so we can get it to the floor for a vote. And,
Thank you.
That would, I will vote for that. I don't know if I can vote to say I'm in favor of it at this point. But I would vote for that, and I'm definitely going to consider this. And I think I'll have, by the time we get to our regular session, I'm pretty sure I'll have my questions answered. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? All those in favor of that vote? Mr. Reedy, why don't I call roll, because we may have, all right, Mr. Ward is aye. Mr. Cleary?
Aye.
Mr. Brewski? He was not here. Mr. Drake?
No.
Mr. Drake?
No.
No. Mr. Efficoro? You're muted.
Aye.
Mr. Langdon?
No.
Mr. Reedy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricard?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Okay, it looks like we have a vote of 6-2 to send it to the floor without any recommendation at all. So we'll move to the floor, because I believe the other committee, law committee, voted 5-4 to send it out with a favorable recommendation, right? So it will move to the floor. Mr. Efficoro, a great job, and we'll have some more discussion about it before the vote. So, all right. The next item on the agenda, and I want to thank we had a guest speaker tonight, and she's been very patiently waiting. She is the principal engineer of the Offshore Wind project, and it's Adrian Downey. And Adrian, welcome. We certainly are not going to, we don't want to shorten your speech at all. It's a very important message. It's very exciting times for the Albany County and our surrounding communities with this project. So we want to hear what you have to say. So you're on.
Thank you so much, Legislator Ward. I really appreciate the opportunity to join this evening's committee meeting. Thank you all for your time, very sincerely. And far be it for me to get in the way of the important work of legislation.
This is pretty important stuff right here, though.
Well, likewise, and nothing more important right now than economic recovery as we work our way out of the pandemic. So, on a related but slightly different topic, Patrick, I'm just wondering whether or not should I be sharing or what's most convenient?
Yeah, you should try.
Okay, I'm going to try, and you let me know if this
You're good.
Showing up well.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm going to do full screen and then see if we've got it. Hopefully licked. Does that work?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, again, being mindful of folks' time, we'll try to keep it tight and tidy, but really pleased to have an opportunity to connect with this committee. Thank you very much for having me. Indeed, my name is Adrienne Downey. I'm the principal engineer for Offshore Wind with NYSERDA. NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and we are tasked with many programs under our state's ambitious climate and clean energy goals. And here, really excited to be able to present on some updates that specifically relate to one such technology, offshore wind. And so, for those of you who are not familiar with offshore wind, it is indeed what you see here. Large-scale turbines, wind turbines being installed in the Atlantic Ocean, so off of our coastal waters. But as we'll see, there are some very interesting intersections with Albany County and very exciting news as a result. So we'll dive right in, and I'll try to keep this again brief. I know it's been a long evening for many and energized, but I do welcome questions at the end. So please, by all means, looking forward to that as well. So where we start in this conversation is really just the ambition of our state's climate laws. In 2019, we signed as a state into legislation the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, or Climate Act equivalently, which comprehensively charts our state's path towards a clean energy economy. And a major pillar of that is a commitment to 100% clean, carbon-free electricity by 2040, which in infrastructure terms is tomorrow. It's an incredibly ambitious target. It's a lot to do, and it requires a very all hands on deck type of approach for us as a state to consider the resource mix potential that would bring us to 100% clean electricity. And so when we think about that goal, and it's incredibly aggressive, not only ambitions from an electron's perspective, but also from the timing, we are cognizant that we have to again look to the various tools in our state's toolkit, and one such powerhouse resource is potentially offshore wind. And so the Climate Act specifically brought to bear not only the wholesale target of 100% clean, but an interim target of 70% renewable energy by 2030. And a big portion of how we bridge both that 70 by 30 goal and the 100% by 2040 goal is through offshore wind. And so the Climate Act specifically says that by 2035, we as a state will have installed at least 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind. And that is, just to give you some context, enough power for approximately 6 million, or the equivalent of 6 million New York State homes, or roughly 30% of our anticipated load by 2035. So it really is going to be a very significant portion of our future electricity mix here in the state, but it's also a major economic development plan. And so following on the conversations that we just had and recognizing the importance of these topics, it's important to note that when we say 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035, we simultaneously, in the same breath, say 10,000 jobs and billions of dollars in infrastructure that we intend to bring to bear from particularly private sector investments in our state. And so just to help paint the picture, why offshore wind? Well, fundamentally, it's about the size of the resource and its potential proximal to where our state's demand is highest. So looking very much to the downstate areas, to New York City and to Long Island, where there is a tremendous amount of generation that is required to service that load. And as you see here, the technology that we have now available to us as we contemplate this resource has grown enormously enormously. So if those of you who are familiar with onshore wind turbines, you can see their equivalent here. A typical average onshore US turbine is, better part of 460 odd feet. And pushing through 574 feet. When we talk about offshore wind, those turbines, the onshore equivalents are maybe 2 megawatts, 3 megawatts. An offshore equivalent of the Haliade X variety that is shown here from GE's portfolio is 12 megawatts. So these are really enormous pieces of equipment that can be brought to bear. And what that offers us is really, again, a powerhouse technology close to where some of the load centers are, and an opportunity to really diversify our clean energy resources and bring to bear, again, thousands of jobs and investment potential. And so just to sketch it out for folks, not presuming a degree of familiarity. So I do apologize if this is background that you're already familiar with, but it's important to understand who the various players are in this in this entire equation. So on the one hand, offshore wind is, as we said, it's in the ocean, it's in the Atlantic. Those are federal waters. And so we work very closely with the Department of Interior, and specifically the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is an agency under the Department of Interior that is effectively the landlord of the waters. And so they are the gatekeepers, if you will, of lease areas that can be developed for offshore resources, including for renewable energy such as offshore wind. So they oversee all of the federal permitting processes and approvals in federal waters. What makes a project a state project is when we connect it to our grid. And when we deliver a project that then has an offtake agreement or a contractual arrangement with the state of New York. And specifically in this case, based upon the authorization of the Public Service Commission, whose regulations we implement here at NYSERDA in this regard, it's NYSERDA that is the contracting entity that ultimately financially enables these projects and brings them to bear on behalf of the state. So the state's role is many. We work very closely with our sister agencies, DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Department of State, and of course DPS, as mentioned, to help understand and articulate the resource. But as well, we service in the role of this long-term revenue contract offer with industry. And of course, the third party that we keep speaking about are the developers. So this is private industry who are tasked with designing, financing, building, and ultimately operating these projects. And they are the parties that, as we contract with them as a state entity, we beget one relationship that is the foundation for thousands of relationships, like any form of supply chain, right? Someone has to build the foundation. Someone has to build, the individual components, all of the pieces that come together, their sub-supply, their services, all of that work is then coordinated by the developers, but brought to bear through a community of businesses. And this comes a little bit more sharply into focus when we look at where, right? And we always have to look at maps to see, where are we talking about here? So again, the offshore areas that are being advanced for these projects are those lease areas in federal waters, such as those that you see here in blue on the map. So these are existing lease areas for which the rights to develop have been already privately allocated through competitive lease auctions that BOEM holds, and they can be developed as projects that ultimately, again, bid into the state. So you see this red line here is the demarcation between state and federal waters. And again, what brings a project to bear and makes it a New York project is foundationally where it connects to and with whom it has a contracting agreement. But New York's targets, just to put that into context even further, at 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035 is leading the pack by a tremendous margin. Up and down the state, up and down the coastlines, from Maine all the way through the Carolinas, there are, many states that have likewise recognized this powerhouse potential for clean energy combined with economic development opportunity and are advancing goals. So New York is really uniquely poised in that we are central to all of those areas. We're right in the middle of all those blue areas that have prior leasing opportunities. We're centrally located. We can access them all competitively through our procurements, but we can also be the hub of a supply chain in, to the north and to the south. And when we think about, the aggregated potential, if you'd asked anyone 5-6 years ago, how much offshore wind was there? It wasn't much, right? Now with 30 gigawatts or 30,000 megawatts of targets, and again, none of these have yet been constructed and built, with the exception of the Block Island wind farm and some project work in Virginia. We're talking about a handful of turbines. We're about to grow, however, to a 30,000 megawatt industry in the region, which is going to put us very squarely on the global map for this technology. So just wanted to put a very fine point on, it's not just where New York is and what we are uniquely poised for, and a leader in the region, but we're clearly main stage on the global prospects for offshore wind investment. And that's a really powerful moment, which we're in, that, again, a handful of years ago was not yet the case. However, things are progressing rapidly. We're really excited by the prospect of what this inflection point means in the aggregated US demand for this resource in New York at its center. So moving on, I reached out to offer this briefing in part, because we had some news. So in January of this year, we had a tremendous opportunity as a state to make our second major offshore wind announcement, but also major announcements with regards to our onshore portfolio suite. So in addition to 24 large-scale land-based renewable energy projects in excess of 2,000 megawatts of projects being awarded, we awarded 2 new offshore wind projects. And this is in complement to projects that we had announced in 2019, pardon me. And so this brings our combined portfolio as a state to over, all told, over 4,000 megawatts of active development. So these 2 new projects, specifically Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind, are themselves in the better part of 2,500 megawatts. And we see via the map here how this latest award is adding incrementally to our total portfolio of active development for offshore wind. So in 2018, we solicited projects and awarded in 2019 Empire Wind 1 and Sunrise Wind with the parties Equinor and a joint venture of Ørsted and Eversource, other developers in the space. Those were our first 2 projects that NYSERDA contracted with. We then went back into the market again, and that's the announcement in January, was this 2,500 megawatt award, an incredibly large award to Empire Wind 2 and to Beacon Wind. And so those are the 2 additional projects that we have. And so these projects bring to bear, again, clean energy assets in the ocean connecting to our grid. So Empire Wind 1 is anticipating connecting to the Scoana substation, Empire 2 to the Barrett substation, and so on and so forth. And so you're seeing not only their clean energy attributes being brought to bear, but we're also starting to see these yellow dots. And these yellow dots speak to ports. And when you're talking about a rotor blade that is 300 feet long or more, a tower that is 450 feet, you can start to see how difficult it would be to take that type of equipment down Main Street. It's not going by Main Street anyhow, anyway. Rather, it's very much predicated upon a waterside existence, on a quayside access, because ultimately it's going out into the ocean. So from a logistics perspective, port infrastructure is critical, particularly in unlocking the economic development potential. You unlock the ports, you unlock the activities, they start happening locally. And so we went into the market last time with that goal squarely in focus. And so we were, we being NYSERDA, we put forward a combination of our clean energy ambitions and port infrastructure ambitions and put them sharply into focus by leveraging private dollars. And what came to bear was an incredibly successful result. We went into the market with at least offering up to $200 million in public funding that had been earmarked state funding in order to help unlock port infrastructure potential. And what we actually brought to bear was the better part of a $3 private investment for every dollar of public investment that we ultimately spent, to a total of $644 million. So we awarded projects and port dollars in order to unlock their potential. And these are the exciting things that we're starting to see happening, particularly here in Albany. So in Albany, at the Port of Albany, the Beacon Island site, which is a greenfield location that the Albany Port District Commission has been advancing specifically for clean energy purposes and forward-thinking industries. That parcel will be developed for the nation's very first offshore wind tower and transition piece manufacturing. So again, to date, without much of an industry here in the United States or an offshore wind prospect, all of these components have been coming from Europe. But what we're starting to see now, and particularly through this really watershed investment, is that manufacturing of this nature and of this scale is starting to happen here. So it's specifically a partnership with the Albany Port District Commission and tower manufacturers, Marmon and Welcome, that is being brought to bear. And it's a 30-year investment that they're making to make, again, steel towers that will be part of a wind turbine's ultimate assembly. Each of those turbines, approximately 450 feet in length, and approximately 150 of them per year. So that's the core of their business. They are an open access manufacturer, which means that they can work with any number of not only private developers, but also different turbine manufacturers. And they anticipate being operational by as early as 2023. So it's really quite an accelerated timeframe that they're going to be working on to bring this investment to bear. And between now and then, clearly there's going to be a tremendous amount of work in formalizing the site plans, and constructing the port, bringing it up to snuff, and making it fit for a state-of-the-art application. The other investment that came through this latest award is with regards to the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal and Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where that location, an existing port, but in significant disrepair, is going to be revitalized in order to service a staging facility. So staging and pre-assembly of many of these components, as well as operations and maintenance activities for Equinor. So all told, very exciting port investments. And this latest package, just to give you a sense of scale and size, this latest package, these last two projects alone are anticipated to bring more than 5,000 direct jobs, 5,200 direct jobs, and a combined economic activity, so in-state spending of almost $9 billion. It's a tremendous amount of money that we're trying to bring to bear, especially in this moment of recovery post-COVID. And we're trying to do it in such a fashion that we're also, mindful of opportunities, particularly for our most vulnerable. The precepts of the climate law are a just transition and an inclusive clean energy economy. And so there are major investments as well being made in workforce development, as well as just access funding and the like. And so again, just to sum up our total portfolio of activities relating to offshore wind from our work over the past just even few years, is that we have more than 4,300 megawatts in active development, representing 5 offshore wind projects, 4 from NYSERDA and 1 from the Long Island Power Authority. We have 5 ports that are being activated with a diversity of activities: the Port of Albany that we've described, the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, the Port of Queens, Port Jefferson, and Montauk Harbor. So all told, we're seeing again this tremendous intersection of opportunity between port infrastructure and these projects to help unlock really powerful economic development. And so really that's, again, putting that firmly into focus. When we said 9,000 megawatts, we say 10,000 jobs, and we're well on our way. Our first projects that came to bear, 1,600 jobs are anticipated to flow from these investments. The second solicitation, 5,200 jobs. So a combined portfolio of more than 12 billion and more than almost 7,000 jobs, all told. So we're on our way, but clearly not satiated, and working towards more and continuing to advance this industry. But what I also wanted to just bring to bear, and this should, I believe, be my last slide, just to help round us out, is with regards to workforce training. And so we want to be mindful that we're creating a new industry here in the state of New York, and that will bring new challenges and new workforce opportunities, but also needs, right? How can we be proactive about addressing potential skills gaps and needs with from the training basis that we have? And certainly, New York is well equipped to deliver, world-class infrastructure. We've been doing this for years. However, there are incremental skills, training, safety considerations of working in such demanding environments that do beget special skill sets. And so the goal here is, as noted, is that the state has been very mindful of this need to make sure that New Yorkers have the credentials and they're ready and able, in addition to willing, to take on some of these roles. And we've earmarked $20 million of public funding specifically for the purposes of offshore wind training through what we're calling the Offshore Wind Training Institute. And this is actually less of a brick and mortar specific location, rather it's an umbrella of funding. So the first $3 million of 20 has just recently been solicited between January and I think the proposals actually just closed last week. But it's the first foray of funding being made available, and successive waves towards the full 20 million will be made available. And really, we're looking for partnerships between local labor organizations, local academic institutions, and local community centers that are already engaged and have the established relationships with communities on workforce development and training, not to replicate the wheel, rather to provide competitive funding so as to augment those existing relationships. So I'll stop there. It was a lot to take in a short period of time, but I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have. I defer, however, back to you, Legislator Ward.
Thank you, Ms. Downey. Very, very exciting times. Great presentation. We have a lot of members' hands up right now. I'm going to start with Ms. McLaughlin. Actually, Ms. McLaughlin, if you don't mind, I'll defer. I failed to recognize earlier, this is a joint committee meeting with the Conservation, Sustainability, and Green Initiatives, and our chairman, Mr. Reinhardt. I should have introduced him in the beginning, and I'll let him ask the first question since I missed him. You're muted.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, my question has to do with the last slide, and you mentioned Stony Brook, and you described that $3 million as an initial wave of funding, and you're looking for future partnerships. I'm thinking, although I used to be at NYSERDA, I had a long career there, and I love to see the work that you guys are doing now. I'm right now focused on Albany County, and so I'm thinking that we have workforce training needs here associated with the developments that are going to be going on at the port, at Koyman, and the supply chain that could be worked beyond just the port facilities. So how would Hudson Valley or other local schools participate in the job training effort? That's kind of my first question. My second question really is, how do we implement the environmental justice requirements of the state climate law to make sure that as we create this workforce and we train the workforce, that we address the social equity and environmental justice, so that minority businesses, women-owned businesses are all part of this exciting new world that we're entering. So I got two questions there.
Those are great questions. I am glad to respond, if I may, please.
Yes.
So with regards to the last slide and the indication of the SUNYs, specifically SUNY, Stony Brook, and Farmingdale, it would be, how to say this? It would be a false conclusion to say that they are the recipients of the first $3 million. Their role is as an administrator alongside NYSERDA of this institute, given that they have experience in working on research and development topics relating to offshore wind. In particular, Stony Brook has been working very closely with the National Offshore Wind R&D Consortium. So there is a degree of know-how that those institutions have in this industry that have been working to cultivate. And so they are partners with NYSERDA and the Department of Labor and other state agencies to really help sketch out the plan for our state's activities with regards to offshore wind training. But they are not again a brick and mortar institute that is the location of the funding. Mm-hmm. Rather, the $3 million that we have just launched as an initial wave, to be followed with subsequent waves, we're indeed eligible to local training partners. And I can't say because they've just come in with proposals, but there are certainly parties, in keeping with the list that you provided, that have been very mindful of this opportunity and working collaboratively with NYSERDA on their approach to workforce training and development. So we do continue to certainly encourage, a strong dialogue between, the capital region and local training centers, such as exactly those that you've described. So we're hopeful to see, some training opportunities and prospects with those partnerships brought to bear in the not distant future.
Thank you.
The second question about creating an inclusive clean energy economy is pivotal to the work that we're doing. So we, to date, all of these projects and both on the port infrastructure side and on the construction and installation of the technology in the waters, that is all of those jobs, are subject to prevailing wage, and they are part of a framework that encourages, strong relationships, particularly with labor, and the negotiation of good faith agreements with labor towards project labor agreements. A big portion of that work is also pivoting upon relationships with MWBE contractors and giving opportunities to MWBEs and service disabled veteran-owned businesses as part of our state strategy, but we're not done there. We're also working very, very closely with the Climate Action Council, in particular the Climate Justice Working Group, who are, as you may be aware, are very much engaged in the definition of disadvantaged communities and of benefits and of the mechanisms that we can be supporting in order to advance and ensure firm alignment. The Climate Act tells us that we need to deliver at least 35% and ideally 40% of benefits from these programs to disadvantaged communities. That's the law, right? And we're working very closely to help implement that. And so it features in a variety of ways, particularly in our procurements, but it percolates through many other aspects of our program. So it's an excellent question. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Reinhardt, for asking that question. But Chairman Ward, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to respond to this presentation. I represent the 1st District, which is part of the South End that encompasses some of this area. And as someone who has a lifelong connection with the South End and the port, I'm very excited about what this portends for our community, for our county. A 30-year commitment is a real opportunity for environmental, educational, and just generational economic development. So I'm excited to hear what's going on here. But I too would like to get a better understanding of what that economic development is going to look like in the communities that are most connected to the port, be that in Queens and or Albany. The opportunities for economic, environmental, and educational justice are numerous in this project. I was glad to hear her say that there's 35 to 40% going to be attributed to community benefits. So my question with that is, will we have an opportunity to weigh in on what those community benefits will look like, what they will consist of? That's one question. Another question I have is the training institute that you spoke of. I had some previous discussion where there was some thought that there would actually be an entity that might be housed in the South End, so that while I appreciate Hudson Valley, and I know that that's a stellar institution in our community, have nothing but good things to say about it. But for those individuals that live in the community most contiguous to the port and who are going to be potential laborers there, is there still the conversation about housing an institute in the South End and or Queens? That was some conversation that I had been privy to early on, because I do believe that this is something that the people in the South End of Albany in particular have been very excited about. We're very supportive of the application process. And so we're looking to reap some of these benefits from the very beginning and not as an afterthought. So if you could address my concerns there, I'd appreciate it.
Gladly, and they're excellent questions. Thank you very much for posing them. There's a couple of things that I want to make sure that we're all apprised of. One is that NYSERDA is one of many actors in this current moment, and so the state helps to serve as the state and NYSERDA specifically, again through the solicitations that we run and the contracts that we engage in. We enable the project. But ultimately, there are many other parties that work to implement the project. And so chief among these actors is Equinor, who is the party that with whom we are contracting and who is the developer of these two most recent projects, and indeed a third project from a prior award. So they are going to play a very outsized role. It is their anchor investment that is making this tower facility happen, right? And they have an incredibly firm commitment that they have made to us as part of their proposals, right? We competitively selected them. And these were the sorts of things that we read very closely when we looked through their proposals and we evaluated their merits. Is what is your engagement to working with and ideally recruiting and delivering benefits to the communities that are proximal, right? That are your neighbors. Are you going to be a good neighbor? Are you going to be a good economic steward of our combined future? And that, it sounds a bit inflated, but that's the way we read it, because that's what we're trying to do. And so Equinor should be a major partner in this discussion. Likewise, the new tower manufacturers, it's going to be their factory, right? Working in tandem with the Albany Port District Commission. So Marmon and Welcon are the two manufacturers that are going to be working in a joint venture and collaborating with the Albany Port District Commission. They are about to start their engagement and working with the communities to develop a staffing plan that absolutely, will be only enhanced by conversations such as these, right? They need to know with whom best to speak, how to engage, how to best reach, the workforce, because ultimately they need the workforce. The Port of Albany is anticipated to bring 500 short-term jobs and 300 long-term jobs. And again, we're speaking about, 30 years when we say long term. And so they need to be good stewards within the community and well connected in order to be fundamentally successful. And that has been pitched from NYSERDA, from the state, without reserve, that is an expectation that we have of them. And again, when I spoke about $47 million, that's a roll up of a lot of initiatives throughout the state that speak to community activities, benefit funds, engagement dollars that they anticipate bringing to bear in service of their project. And their project spans many areas of the state. They will have different aspects in, say, Nassau County. They'll have different aspects in New York City, in Brooklyn specifically. They'll have different aspects here in the capital region. And it's important that they serve as solid partners with each of the communities with which their project will intersect. And so it's a great question. And foundationally, I would absolutely encourage a close dialogue in helping them to shape their plans for these investments and to bring them to bear, because they're just starting now, right? So it's not too late.
Will you be assisting us in building that relationship? Because over the years, we've heard this before. I'm just going to say it. I'm not throwing it at you, but we've heard it before. And the next thing you know, the project is moving along and the jobs are filled and we didn't get what we expected. So I'm going to be looking to NYSERDA, because I think at the beginning you said NYSERDA is the lead agency in New York State on this project. So I will be expecting you to help us form these relationships so that we can see the outcomes that with the expectation that we have that the community will grow economically, individually and collectively as a result of this project. So I will be reaching out and hoping that we can be on the front end of those discussions, not the back end. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, please do.
Thank you. Mr. Simpson?
Yes, apropos of the recent discussion we've just had, the CLCPA, stipulates a goal of 40% and a floor of around 35% of engagement in disadvantaged communities. One of the things that's been a question is, how do we engage in the discussion? In other words, who makes the decision about what disadvantaged communities are going to be served? Is it the Climate Action Council? And what's the best way for the county legislature to be at the table, and also for community groups to engage in the process? I mean, I don't know if there's a firm definition about what disadvantaged communities are. I mean, there's a lot of discussion, but I don't know if the actual parameters of that have been fleshed out yet.
And it seems to me that, if we're going to require a skilled workforce to develop this product in Albany County, I personally would like to see the educational facility in Albany County to make sure that the skilled workers, at least in those areas where we're looking to the underserved, I should say, where they can have access to the education to get that skill. It would make a lot of sense to me to put it in that area somewhere between Queens and the port.
I'm specifically concerned about the job and the apprenticeship opportunities. I mean, one of the things that I think happens is in the capital region, we talk about it as almost as the equivalent of New York City, but from I think almost northern majority minority district, which is the third, to the port is less than 5 miles. In other words, the 6 majority minority communities are in a very, very small geographic area. But the needs, in terms of disadvantaged communities are centralized with a large part of the county population. So I guess what I'm asking for is hopefully some guidance as to the most efficient way for us to be at the table to concretely get the workforce training and the jobs that are, whatever percentage of jobs would be equitable for us.
Very good.
Many excellent questions. I would just to answer a couple of them, if I may. The Climate Action Council, and specifically the Climate Justice Working Group, which is a group under the council working subcommittee, is tasked with helping to promulgate the definition of disadvantaged community that you're describing. They have arrived at an interim definition that speaks to a question of low and medium income housing, a specific quartile thereof, the clearly economic or environmental justice communities, and other. There's a package of definitions that the Climate Justice Working Group is in the prospect of firming, and so we're working. NYSERDA is working within the guidance of the Climate Justice Working Group and of the Climate Action Council as a whole, to articulate, who are these communities, and then what are the benefits that are prospective. And clearly we know that jobs is a major one of those, and so these efforts are, I would say, the beginning, right? We're working on expanding our reach, making sure that we have the right inroads with local communities, that we are being present and available, transparent and accountable and accessible at these types of forum in order to make these relationships. I will look forward to continuing the conversation with each of you and to help make connections, with the developers, with the partners, with the academic training centers. But I would also just like to stress, please, that many of the jobs that we're describing are also jobs that we already have skills and abilities for. For example, a tower manufacturer facility is, there are many skills that are part and parcel of the existing workforce. So it's an opportunity there, and it's an opportunity to utilize our existing workforce and to expand, through these targeted dollars into pre-apprenticeship training opportunities, deepening access and inroads to the jobs of the future, right? And so that's the goal here in delivering these funds, and it's really the first of many. And so we look to this conversation and these types of communications and the follow-up that I hope ensues to help make sure that NYSERDA is well apprised of with whom should we best be working with, because it goes both ways as to what is the most efficient path, right? We can say from the state what we think the most efficient path is, but really, this is your community. You tell us what is the most efficient path, with whom should we be working, and we will gladly be on the phone speaking with them directly. So I certainly welcome the question, but also welcome your feedback and input so that we evolve this process and we've got the right people at the table continuously.
Thank you. Would you be available to meet with the county's legislative Black caucus to give us some further guidance as to how to proceed?
Gladly. And in fact, what I would probably best encourage is that we bring in one of my colleagues who works on workforce training and development specifically, and that we have that conversation, because we're very eager for your input.
Oh, thank you very much.
Mr. Simpson, if the Black Caucus wouldn't mind, as the Economic Development Chair, I'd be interested in that myself.
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
I think it's a very important portion of this project. So I do have a question. Who is on the Climate Action Council in part of the Climate Justice Group? That's been mentioned a few times, and the question came from the chat room here.
Mm-hmm. So you can actually Google the Climate Action Council. There's climate.ny.gov. And so if you Google the Climate Action Council and specifically their membership groups, and you can see the multitude of sub-councils that exist, as well as their composition. So you'll see that the Climate Justice Working Group is comprised of a number of environmental justice leaders from around the state, but that is public and by all means accessible to this entire committee. So please, I encourage you to go and have a look at.
Do you know if there's any representing Albany County on that commission? Or?
That is an excellent question.
We can Google it. We don't mean to belabor it, but that would be good to know, though.
Mm-hmm. So, and indeed, all the past meeting materials, from their committee meetings and the like, are also available. So just encourage folks who would like to dig in a little bit more in that sector.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Drake, you're next, and Mr. Miller after.
Hello. Thank you. Unfortunately, none of my constituents happen to be lucky enough to hold leases in the ocean. But I'm wondering, aside from the potential job creation, we've heard a lot about the money invested, which ostensibly is our tax dollars, correct?
No, well, partially no. The $200 million of port infrastructure funding that accompanied this latest solicitation is from the state budget, so would be from the tax base. However, again, we didn't even spend the full $200 million. The balance of our program and the balance of all of NYSERDA's Clean Energy Standard programs are per the prescription of the Public Service Commission accounted for via electricity rates.
So then those funds come from customers of the electricity providers, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it would be safe to say that taxpayers are also electricity consumers.
Correct. However, I wouldn't want to confuse the different budgets, but
right. Okay. So I guess where I'm going with this is, what is the benefit to my constituents here in Albany County, those of whom do not own ocean leaseholds and those of whom may not work at the port, particularly since in my district, we are not considered a disadvantaged community. What will be the advantages to us as constituents, as electricity consumers, energy purchasers, as taxpayers? What will be the net financial or otherwise benefit to my constituency? And I understand, I'm not asking very, very specific, but if you could just kind of give me your marketing nutshell, how are they going to benefit from this in the end?
Sure, and it's hopefully a little bit more than just marketing, sir, but we've done, the state has done quite a bit to look at that question. Specifically last summer when NYSERDA and the Department of Public Service collaborated very closely on a white paper. There was the suite of policy recommendations to the commission that looked to implement the entire clean energy standard, which is really 100% clean by 2040. How do we do that? What is our recommendations in terms of resource mix? And foundationally, why? And the question of why, which is very much to your question, is a combination of, what are the social benefits that we will accrue through a clean energy future? And so we know that those clean energy benefits speak to a couple of things, one of which is air quality, right? The other is climate change and climate risk. So the social cost of carbon, if you will. But the other piece that we're looking at very closely is clearly economic development opportunity. And it's that combination of activities that was foundationally part of not just offshore wind, but all of our clean energy resources writ large, as part of our representations to the state through that publication and saying, these are the goals that would implement the act. This is the portfolio of solutions that will help to implement the act. And these are their costs and their benefits. And the overwhelming calculation that came out of that was that there's a phenomenal net benefit to the state, billions of dollars of net benefit to the state. When all told, we've done the calculus, we've taken off the costs, and we've added up and looked at the potential benefits that again speak to health impacts, climate mitigation impacts, and job impacts. There is a colossal net benefit here to our investment in clean energy resources for the future. So that is a fully available calculation that is available on the Public Service Commission's dockets for clean energy. I'd be glad to follow up with, there's a great presentation that was made between Public Service Commission staff and NYSERDA collaborating specifically on the net benefits of the programs. So if you're eager to dig in, I'd be glad to send along some links that would be hopefully helpful there.
Well, thank you for that. It's very comprehensive. But one question is, how do my constituents directly benefit from their electricity rate dollars, their tax dollars? Okay, how do my constituents here in Albany County directly benefit from this, tremendous investment in offshore wind technology in a quantitative sense? So they're investing their dollars, right? Their electricity rates that they pay. They're investing their tax money. Okay, they're going to work every day. What's the impact on their family budgets when it comes down to the wind power? How is that going to assist them, in the near term and then in the long term? Can you give me some ideas on a quantitative basis?
So, I mean, certainly, individual households, we all pay for the social cost of carbon in means like, respiratory health issues and illnesses. We pay for that when we go to the hospital and when we get our bills. And if we are fortunate enough to have benefits, that's part of our calculation. So we pay for these things already, right? What we're paying for is an investment that helps to alleviate another financial burden that families have. And there's also the prospect of job opportunities, right? You could work.
May I just interrupt though?
Please.
And not to be rude, but certainly not everyone is afflicted by respiratory illnesses. And certainly we're not eliminating all carbon pollution with this wind turbine project. So if we could just, since everybody's time is valuable, could we just focus down on what is the financial benefits in terms of electricity rates, household budgets, tax savings, whatever you may have available in your repertoire to the families in my district, either in the short term or the intermediate term? Do you have anything for that?
So again, I would speak to the references that I have made with regards to the anticipated benefits on a statewide basis and calculations that are made on a household basis as a result. I do not have those at my fingertips, but I'm glad to offer those along as supplemental links here afterwards.
Okay, great. So what you're saying is there's going to be a significant decrease in energy costs for families, budgets, and homes. Is that the idea?
Over time, that is certainly the goal of our programs and policies.
With this, I think, aside from what Mr. Drake is getting at, it's one of the questions I have. You know, how do, you know, we know there's a shortage or there's a log jam of power. The power to this area comes from the west right now. Most of it from the Niagara project. And then if you overuse that, there's a log jam in the Utica area. It's hard to get the power from here. And during high use periods, you have they run out of power and they go on to supplemental contracts, which is where the PPAC, the Purchase Power Adjustment Cost, is derived, which all of us see in our bill. Would this serve as a supplemental power source to lower the cost of that? Because that's one of the questions I've had on my mind for a long time.
So, I mean, offshore wind will be connecting into our grid, right? And our grid is predicated upon a diverse resource mix that ensures reliability and cost effectiveness, as well as serviceability, right? We need power when we need it, on demand, and without an interruption. And so part of what we are working to do that is not exclusive to offshore wind, offshore wind will be a resource that is complementary to other resources on our grid. But foundationally as well, the Climate Act, and specifically as well the Spring 2020 Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, which was a companion piece, if you will, to the Climate Act, spoke about tactics. How do we do this, and how do we make sure that we are not only working on a clean energy resource mix, but we're also working to improve, bottlenecks and transmission upgrades and ensuring that serviceability. And so that is a companion piece, if you will, to the Climate Act, and a specific series of legislative actions that are encouraging a very close look at the state's grid infrastructure, transmission infrastructure, and means by which to cost efficiently unbottle resources and to promote connectivity. That has been the subject of major study by the state through a publication that is available now from just this past January, called the Power Grid Study. So that speaks to a comprehensive look at how do we achieve all of these goals, but how do we also unlock bottlenecks that exist and make smart investments in our grid. So it's very much a preoccupation of the state right now, is how do we do that, and how do we unbottle both clean energy resources coming into our grid, but also existing inefficiencies of the grid today, right? At 21st century, this is all part and parcel of how business is going to be done, on an increasing level. We all need connectivity. We all need reliable power. So it's part of that mix of how do we make sure that our economy is well poised for the 21st century.
Okay, so I guess that kind of answered my question. Is this power, there's a lot of power that's going to be derived from these wind turbines. How much of an impact is that going to have on the state? Now, obviously they're right in line, they're facing New York City. So New York City has always had an issue getting at least low cost power, but power sometimes because of the log jam, and that may help solve that. How much of that power will go through New York City to upstate? I guess, do we know the answer to that, or potentially?
It really varies upon the time of day and time of year. And so that's why we rely on a diversity of resources, both in terms of their technology type, but their time of day generation opportunities, and also seasonally, right? There's going to be a tremendous amount of of shift between where and when we as a state are going to have resources brought to bear, at a given moment. And it's entirely possible that the electrons, that come from offshore wind are coming up to Albany County, that are going even further, and vice versa, just in the same way that New York City, requires Niagara Falls. We all rely upon one another and the diversity of resources brought to bear in order to have a functioning and reliable grid on a millisecond basis, right? I mean, it's really an entirely fluid system. And again, these transmission infrastructure investments that the state is contemplating in this close look is making sure that we have the ability for power to flow as it needs in order to make sure that we have the fulsome delivery of as much as we can.
I just don't want to, I'm very excited about this project. I think there's a lot of potential for jobs, especially in the area where we want more jobs or more skilled jobs. But, as far as a power source, I'm very interested in that too, because I know that there's that log jam where we have a hard time getting power past, I keep saying Utica, but that area, there seems to be a log jam. And I know New York City has always been shorted, and this project may help New York City, but it may not help. We may be the ones stuck in the middle of it. And there's a lot of hydro plants in this area, including one in my town, that could use some upgrading that would allow for a lot more power to be sold on the grid in this area. And they're already existing, and nobody seems to want to invest in those. And there's many of them around here. And with the power rates as low, the day ahead pricing has not been very economical for upgrades recently. But, if they had state resources to help them or federal resources, I'm sure that they could be upgraded to a point where they could help the log jam in this area, which is a problem right now. So that's something we got to think about in the whole picture. But I am very excited. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be negative on this project. And I'm also, my friend Matt Miller, been very patient while I keep rambling on here. Matt, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think I'm going to see if I can stay awake this long. So I am very excited about the project. Like Carolyn, this project's going to be mostly the new port expansion will be in my district. So that's very exciting. In my real life, I am a science teacher, and I've been very excited about the prospect of wind power since I was a teenager. So that it's coming to fruition now and that it can be involved in it is tremendous. I have a lot of questions, actually, primarily more along the local infrastructure kind of things, roads, some of the environmental effects for the new construction, the Norman Skill effect on the Norman Skill. I'm not going to ask them all tonight. I'll develop them all to you. I'll put them out to you. It's been a full day for everybody, a full night for everybody. Maybe you said this already, I don't know, but are you going to be able to share that presentation with us so we have a little more time to really reflect on it?
Yes, certainly. The presentation is already, I think, yep, Patrick's.
We have it. We'll get it out tonight.
We'll get it to you.
Okay, excellent. And then you're available. Would we contact you or if we have for these further questions, some of these specific things?
Please.
That I want to, okay. And that's it, Sean. I'll make it short tonight.
You're the best speaker tonight, Matt. Any other questions from the committee or any legislator? If not, thank you, Ms. Downey. This was very informative. I've learned a lot more than I've read already just tonight, and I appreciate you coming in and being patient. It's been a long night, and you've been very nice of you to stay with us throughout it all. Is there any other business to be brought to the Economic Development Committee? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Ricard, second. Anybody left? Right. Mr. Langdon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all. Have a great night. Take care now.
Thank you.